My name is Anna, and for as long as I can remember, my music has been the secret engine of my family's dreams. My father, Marcus, a painter and sculptor of moderate talent, took full credit for the compositions I created in the solitude of my room. My mother, Eleanor, was the silent enabler of this artistic exploitation. The breaking point came when a major record label, A&R Records, showed interest, not in my father's lackluster work, but in a composition I'd written for my brother, Leo's, failing business pitch. My family saw this as their golden ticket to financial salvation. They demanded I hand it over, without a shred of acknowledgement for my role. Now, if you want to know what happens when a secret artist decides to perform for herself, make sure to like and subscribe to hear what happens next in this journey, and to learn how sometimes the most powerful note you can play is silence. My name is Anna, and my music has always belonged to everyone but me. I grew up in a household where art was currency and dreams were a family business. My father, Marcus, was a painter and sculptor of moderate talent who, in his own mind, was a misunderstood genius. My mother, Eleanor, was a former gallery assistant who had traded her career for his. From the outside, we looked like the quintessential creative family, living in a sun-drenched studio apartment in Greenwich Village, filled with easels, clay, and the lingering scent of turpentine. But I was the family's best-kept secret. While my father's work was on display, my music, the melodies that came to me in dreams and the lyrics I scribbled on torn napkins, was the real source of our creative lifeblood. I started composing when I was just a child, first with simple melodies on a hand-me-down keyboard, then with complex arrangements as I got older. My father, perpetually in need of inspiration and money, quickly discovered my talent. "Anna," he'd say, peering over my shoulder with a look of paternal pride that was really a mask for greed. "That piece you're working on, it would be perfect for my new exhibition." He'd then take my composition, sometimes without even asking, and use it as a soundtrack for his video art installations or as a jingle for his promotional materials. The music was always a hit. People would flock to his shows, praising his versatility and deep artistic vision. He never once mentioned my name. My mother, when I would complain, would simply say, "It's all for the family, dear. Your father needs this to succeed." My brother, Leo, 3 years older than me, was a mirror image of our father's ambition and a reflection of his failure. He was always chasing the next big tech trend, launching one failed startup after another, draining our family's already limited finances. My academic achievements were treated as an afterthought. I graduated high school with top honors and a scholarship to a prestigious music conservatory, but my parents urged me to turn it down. "It's too far away, Anna," my mother said, "and what good is a degree in music? You can just keep composing for your father from home." I listened, as I always did. My musical gifts, they insisted, were a family resource, not a personal asset. I became a full-time ghost composer, my life revolving around my father's deadlines and my brother's business ventures. The financial strain was constant. I was always the one to cover their debts, using the small, unacknowledged commissions I earned from private clients. When my father's gallery sales fell through, I'd produce a new track to sell online to help pay the rent. I was trapped in a cycle of being the family's financial and creative savior, all while remaining completely invisible. The most painful part of my existence was the constant lies. Friends of the family would praise me, saying, "You must be so proud of your father's work," and I would smile and nod, unable to reveal the truth. Leo, in particular, was the most adept at this. He'd tell his business partners that his father was a multimedia artist, and that their venture was a fusion of technology and art, all while knowing I was the one creating the actual art. I was the family secret, the one who bore the emotional and financial burden of their failures. Little did I know that a business pitch for a major record label would be the final test that would finally force me to break free and reclaim my own voice. One particular memory stands out. I was about 16, working on a piano piece for my father's new exhibition. It was a complex, emotional melody that I had poured my heart into. My father, seeing my dedication, leaned over and said, "This is the one, Anna. This is the piece that will make me a household name." When the exhibition opened, my piece was the main attraction. People cried, they gasped, they were moved. The critics raved about my father's deep artistic soul, his ability to capture the human condition in a single note. I stood in the corner, a ghost in my own creation, listening to them praise a man who had stolen my soul and was wearing it as his own. I had hoped that my father would, at some point, give me a small sliver of credit. Maybe a "my daughter helped with the score" or a "my daughter is a very talented musician." But he said nothing. He simply took the praise and the money that came with it, and my hopes, as they always did, withered and died. I had always hoped that one day my family would recognize my worth, not as a tool for their success, but as a person. I had always hoped that they would say, "Anna, we are so proud of you. Your music is a gift." But they never did. They simply took and took until there was nothing left for me to give. This constant emotional and creative drain, coupled with the increasing financial demands, left me feeling empty and unfulfilled. I was a well that they could drink from at will, and they never once considered that the well might one day run dry. The pitch to A&R Records was a 3-day affair at a chic downtown Manhattan hotel, just a few blocks from our apartment. Leo had been working on this pitch for 6 months. His new startup, Soundwave, was an app that was supposed to revolutionize music discovery, but so far it had failed to attract any serious investors. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy, and my parents had, without my knowledge, taken out a hefty loan to keep it afloat. The A&R pitch was our last hope. The prize was a significant investment and a partnership with a record label that could launch Leo into a completely new financial stratosphere. My parents had invested every last penny they had, and I could see the panic in their eyes as the due date for the loan approached. I had offered to help, of course, but my suggestions were quickly dismissed. "You don't understand business, Anna," Leo had told me condescendingly. "This is a big league game." Leo's pitch was slated for Saturday morning. The day before, a panic-stricken Leo called me from the hotel. "Anna, you have to help me," he pleaded. "The presentation is a disaster. The music for the app is completely off. The investors aren't going to be impressed." I had warned him months ago that the stock music he had chosen for his presentation was generic and uninspired. "I need you to compose a new piece," he said, his voice laced with desperation. "Something catchy, something that will blow them away. I'll give you until midnight." "But Leo," I protested, "that's only a few hours. I have my own projects to work on." "This is for the family, Anna," he insisted. "You owe us this favor. This is a matter of life or death for our business." I sighed, a sense of grim duty settling over me. I packed a small bag, grabbed my laptop, and took a taxi to the hotel, knowing that this was my last chance to help my family before it was too late. When I arrived, the hotel room was a chaotic mess. Leo paced back and forth, muttering to himself, while my parents sat on the bed, their faces pale with worry. "Thank goodness you're here, Anna," my mother said, her voice a mix of relief and barely disguised impatience. "Please just make it work." I nodded and set up my equipment, the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. I worked feverishly, the melodies flowing from my fingertips. I composed a short, captivating piece, a fusion of classical and electronic music that perfectly captured the app's mission. When I finished, I sent the file to Leo. "It's perfect, Anna," he said, his face lighting up. "This will save us." I felt a brief surge of pride, a fleeting moment of hope that my efforts would finally be recognized. The next morning, I watched from the back of the conference room as Leo's presentation began. He looked confident, his voice steady as he spoke about his vision for Soundwave. He played my music, and the investors' faces lit up. They leaned forward, their interest piqued. The presentation was a resounding success, and when Leo finished, the lead investor, a stern-faced woman named Miss Chen, approached him with a smile. "The app is impressive," she said. "But the music is what sold us. It's truly brilliant. Who composed it?" I held my breath, waiting for Leo to finally give me credit, to introduce me to the person who could launch my own career. Leo looked at me, a flicker of guilt in his eyes, before he turned back to Miss Chen. "Oh, that," he said with a dismissive wave. "That's just a little something my father and I whipped up in the studio. A family collaboration." My heart sank. The lie, spoken with such casual ease, felt like a physical blow. Miss Chen nodded, her smile fading slightly. "I see," she said. "Well, please give your father my compliments." The moment was over, and the opportunity I had hoped for was gone. The investors agreed to the deal, and my family, ecstatic with their success, began to celebrate. I stood there, invisible, my music now just a footnote in Leo's victory. As my family celebrated, I slipped away from the conference room. I was walking down a long, empty hallway, my heart aching with a familiar pain. I had been invisible for so long, a ghost in my own life, that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. But in that moment, in the face of their betrayal, I realized that I had to do something. I had to make myself visible. I went back to the conference room and found Miss Chen, who was packing her briefcase. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaking slightly. She looked up, her expression a mix of politeness and impatience. "I'm Anna," I said. "I'm the one who composed the music for the presentation." She stared at me, her face unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said, "but I was told that your father was the composer." "He's not," I said. "I am. And I'm here to tell you that I'm not a part of this deal. I'm taking my music and my talents with me." I turned and walked away, leaving Miss Chen with a look of stunned disbelief on her face. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew that I couldn't stay there, a silent partner in my own undoing. The celebratory dinner that night was a blur of toasts and congratulations. My parents and Leo chattered excitedly about their future plans, all built on the success of my music. "With this investment, we'll be able to pay off the loan," my father said, clinking his glass with Leo's. "And we can finally start building the studio of your dreams, son." My heart twisted in my chest. They were planning to build a studio for Leo, a musician who couldn't read a single note of sheet music, with money earned from a composition they had stolen from me. I sat in silence, picking at my food, the taste of betrayal bitter on my tongue. I made several attempts to get their attention, to remind them of the reality of the situation, but each time I was brushed aside. When I pointed out that the record deal was contingent on my music, and that they had no one to compose their future tracks, my mother simply replied, "We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. For now, let's just celebrate." The silence that followed their triumphant celebration was absolute. For weeks, I stayed in my room, refusing to interact with my family. I ignored their texts, and when my father or brother tried to talk to me, I'd simply walk away. The only contact I had was through the occasional, passive-aggressive comments from my mother. "I see you're still sulking, Anna," she'd say. "You should be happy for your brother. We're all in this together." I knew they were drowning in debt from Leo's last failed business venture, but the success of the new business deal was all they could focus on. I could see the collection notices piling up, but still, they continued to spend as if they had already received the money. They had been so consumed with the idea of a family business that they had lost sight of reality. The final straw came when I overheard my father and Leo on a phone call. They were talking to a lawyer, discussing the legalities of the record deal. "The contract states that we must provide the musical content for the app on a quarterly basis," Leo said, his voice laced with concern. "How are we going to do that without Anna?" My father's voice was firm. "We'll find a way. She'll come around. She always does." I felt a cold surge of anger. They didn't see me as a person, but as a tool, a resource they could exploit whenever they needed me. They had already taken out a second mortgage on our apartment to fund Leo's failing business. A fact they had hidden from me until I discovered the papers while searching for some sheet music. They were willing to risk everything to support Leo, but not me. A few days later, my mother approached me as I was packing. "What are you doing, Anna?" she asked, her voice tight with panic. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steady. "But you can't," she protested. "The business. We need you." "You never needed me, Mom," I said, the words coming out as a whisper. "You just needed my music. I'm taking it back." I zipped my bag, and without another word, I walked out the door. My mother called out my name, her voice a mix of desperation and betrayal, but I didn't turn back. I took a cab to the train station, my heart heavy with a pain I hadn't known I had to endure. My last conversation with my father was a painful one. He cornered me as I was carrying my bags out of the apartment. "Anna," he said, his face etched with a mix of frustration and hurt. "Please don't do this. We're a family." "A family doesn't use each other, Dad," I said, my voice trembling. "A family supports each other. A family tells the truth." He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry for everything." And I knew he meant it. But a simple apology wasn't enough to undo years of emotional and creative exploitation. It wasn't enough to make me forget the way they had used me, the way they had taken my music and called it their own. I stepped into the elevator, the doors closing on my past. I watched my father's face, a look of despair in his eyes as he realized that I was gone for good. I had no idea what the future held for me, but I knew that it would be a future of my own making. I would no longer be the ghost composer, the invisible talent that fueled someone else's dreams. I would be Anna, the musician, and I would finally have a life and a voice of my own. That night, I began to unpack my life, sorting through my belongings as if they were memories. I was staying with my friend, Sarah, a fellow musician I had met at a local cafe. Her small studio apartment was a haven of calm, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just left. Sarah, having watched my family's emotional and financial exploitation from afar, had always been my quiet support system. "It's about time you left, Anna," she said, wrapping an arm around me. "They were using you, and you deserved better." The first week of complete silence from my family was both painful and liberating. I checked my phone constantly, expecting a frantic call, an apology, a demand for my return, anything. But nothing came. It was as if I had vanished, a ghost in their lives as I had been a ghost composer for so long. My emotions were a chaotic symphony. Some days, I felt a soaring sense of freedom, eager to compose my own future. Other days, I was filled with a deep sense of loss, a hollow feeling of not belonging to anyone or anywhere. The hardest moments were when I missed them, not the family who had used me, but the imagined version of them, the family who loved and supported me for who I was. Sarah was my anchor during this difficult time. She helped me find a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a one-bedroom with a tiny kitchen and a large window overlooking a park. When I turned the key in the lock for the first time, I felt a surge of pride, a sense of ownership that had been absent from my life for so long. I decorated the space with intention, buying a used piano from a music store and filling the shelves with books on music theory and composition. I started a blog, The Unheard Symphony, where I wrote about my journey and shared my music for free. The blog was my way of reclaiming my voice, of proving to myself that my music had value, even if it wasn't attached to a business deal or a family legacy. Slowly, my life began to take shape. I started working as a music teacher at a local community center and performing at small cafes and art galleries. My new life was nothing like the high-stakes, high-stress world I had left behind, but it was honest. I was in control, and for the first time in my life, I was the one making the decisions. At work, my students responded to my passion and my dedication. My supervisor, a kind older woman who had been a musician for most of her life, recognized my talent and encouraged me to apply for grants and scholarships. She saw my music for what it was, a unique and powerful expression of my soul, and not as a tool for financial gain. 6 months after moving out, I received a grant to create a public art installation, a musical composition that would play in a city park for a week. The project was a success, and my music received rave reviews. My confidence soared. I was finally building a life on my own terms, a life that had nothing to do with my family. The new friends I made were a revelation. They knew nothing of my past, nothing of my family's artistic and financial failures. They saw me as Anna, the talented musician and dedicated teacher. I found myself opening up, sharing my hopes and dreams without the fear of them being taken and used for someone else's gain. I started dating a fellow musician, a talented guitarist named David who saw me for who I was, not for what I could do for him. He was supportive and kind, and with him, I felt safe and seen. We spent our evenings composing together, creating music that was a pure expression of our shared love for the art form. My life, which had once been a cacophony of emotional and financial stress, was now a beautiful, harmonious melody. I had found my voice, my worth, and my purpose, not by fighting for my family's approval, but by walking away from their toxicity. The distance had given me perspective, showing me how deeply unhealthy our dynamics had been and how much energy I had spent trying to prove my worth to people who were determined not to see it. My decision to leave my family, to refuse to be their financial and creative savior, had an immediate and profound effect. The promised investment from A&R Records was delayed, and then, after weeks of back-and-forth negotiations, it was canceled entirely. Without my music, Leo's pitch was just another app idea, and a weak one at that. I learned about their struggles not from them, but from Sarah, who had heard from a mutual friend that Leo's startup had officially gone bankrupt. My father, unable to sell his art without my music to accompany it, had also lost his gallery representation. The house, which had been put up as collateral for the second mortgage, was now facing foreclosure. They had gambled everything on my music, on a talent they had always taken for granted, and they had lost. Each time I heard about their financial woes, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. I felt a sense of vindication, a grim satisfaction that they were finally facing the consequences of their actions. But beneath that, I felt a deep sadness, a mourning for the family I had lost and for the life I had hoped for. I reminded myself of the times they had belittled me, of the years I had spent as their ghost composer, and the memory of their betrayal hardened my resolve. I had to protect myself. I had to continue to build my own life, a life where my worth wasn't tied to their approval or their financial stability. I continued to work hard, and my new life began to flourish. I received a significant commission to compose a score for an independent film, a project that gave me financial stability and creative freedom. I started a relationship with a fellow musician, a talented guitarist named David who saw me for who I was, not for what I could do for him. He was supportive and kind, and with him, I felt safe and seen. We spent our evenings composing together, creating music that was a pure expression of our shared love for the art form. My life, which had once been a cacophony of emotional and financial stress, was now a beautiful, harmonious melody. I had found my voice, my worth, and my purpose, not by fighting for my family's approval, but by walking away from their toxicity. The silence from my family was a powerful thing. It was a sign that they had no more to give, no more to take. They had exhausted their creative and financial resources, and without me, they were left with nothing. I had hoped that my absence would force them to confront their issues, to take responsibility for their actions, but they continued to live in their fantasy world of entitlement and denial. They were still a family, but they were a family in crisis, and I knew that there was nothing I could do to help them until they were ready to help themselves. I was working on a new song one evening, a simple piano melody, when I received a text from an unknown number. It was my father. "Anna," it read, "I'm sorry to bother you, but the bank is calling again. They're saying we have until the end of the month." I didn't respond. A few hours later, another text came through, this one from my mother. "Please, Anna. We're so scared. We don't know what to do. Your brother, he's not doing well." I felt a pang of guilt, a familiar sense of responsibility, but I held firm. I knew that if I responded, they would see it as an opening, a sign that they could continue to use me. The first attempt at contact came in the form of a frantic phone call from my mother, a call I almost didn't answer. Her voice was strained, laced with panic. "Anna," she said, "you have to come home. The bank is going to foreclose on the apartment." The audacity of her request stunned me. After months of silence, she was calling me, not to apologize, but to demand my help. "I can't, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "I have my own life now." "But this is your family," she insisted. "You can't just abandon us." I took a deep breath, the memories of their betrayal flooding my mind. "I didn't abandon you, Mom," I said quietly. "You abandoned me a long time ago." She hung up without another word. A few days later, I received a text from Leo. "Anna," it read, "I know you're mad at me, but we're in a bad place. I've lost everything. I need your help. Can you lend me some money?" I stared at the message, a bitter smile on my face. He had lost everything, but he still believed that he was entitled to my help. I didn't respond. I knew that helping them financially would only reinforce the old patterns, the cycle of giving and taking that had defined our relationship for so long. I had to let them face the consequences of their actions, to let them learn the hard way that you can't build a life on someone else's talent. I continued to focus on my own life, on my music, and my relationships. I met with a lawyer to discuss the legalities of my past work. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman who had handled similar cases, told me that I had a strong case against my father and brother for intellectual property theft. She urged me to pursue it, but I hesitated. I didn't want to destroy them completely, to watch them lose everything they had. I just wanted them to finally acknowledge my role, to understand the damage they had caused. My friend Sarah, who had been my rock, was the one who finally convinced me to stand my ground. "Anna," she said one afternoon, "you have to stop thinking about what they need and start thinking about what you need. You deserve to have your own life, your own success, without them taking credit for it. You can't be a martyr for a family that never appreciated you." Her words, spoken with a quiet conviction, resonated with me. I knew that she was right. I had to let them go, for my own sanity and my own well-being. The next time my father called, I let the call go to voicemail. I didn't listen to the message. I simply deleted it. It was a small act, but it felt like a monumental victory. I was finally taking control of my own life, my own story. I was no longer a victim, but a survivor. I was no longer a ghost composer, but a living, breathing artist. The news came in a frantic phone call from my father, who sounded older and more defeated than I had ever heard him. "Anna," he said, his voice a strained whisper, "we've lost the apartment." My heart, which had been hardened by months of betrayal, felt a pang of sadness. I knew it was coming, but hearing the words spoken out loud still felt like a physical blow. "What happened?" I asked, my voice flat. "The bank. The foreclosure went through," he said, his voice cracking. "We have nowhere to go." He then told me that they had been forced to move into a cheap, one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. He didn't ask for money this time, but the implication was clear. He wanted me to save them, to be their financial and emotional savior once again. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said, my voice laced with a sadness I couldn't hide. "But I can't help you, not this time." A week later, I received a text from Leo. It was not a plea for money, but an invitation to a family dinner. "Mom is making your favorite dish," the text read. "Please come, Anna. We miss you." The text was so disingenuous that I almost laughed. They weren't asking me to come home because they missed me. They were asking me to come home because they needed me. I knew that if I went, they would try to manipulate me, to convince me to save them. I knew that I had to stand my ground. I declined the invitation, sending a simple text back. "I can't. I have to work." I knew that my response would hurt them, but I also knew that it was the only way to protect myself. The next few weeks were a painful exercise in maintaining my distance. My father called a few more times, his voice growing more desperate with each call. He told me that my mother was distraught, that Leo was spiraling, and that they had no idea how they were going to survive. I listened, my heart heavy with a sadness that was not my own. I had to remind myself that their problems were not my responsibility, that I had to put my own well-being first. I had to be a person, not a resource. The final call came on a cold winter night. It was my father, and this time his voice was different. It was soft, hesitant, and filled with a genuine sense of remorse. "Anna," he said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about how we abandoned you, and you were right. We took your talent for granted. We used you." The words were so unexpected that I was rendered speechless. "I don't know if you'll ever forgive us," he continued, "but I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. For everything." He then told me that he had gotten a job teaching art at a local community center and that Leo was working as a bartender. They were struggling, but they were finally learning to stand on their own 2 feet. This time, I didn't just let the call go to voicemail. I didn't just delete the message. I called him back. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking, "I heard you, and I appreciate you saying that. But an apology isn't going to fix everything. It's going to take a lot of time to heal." He understood. He didn't push, he didn't plead. He just said, "I know. I just wanted you to know." We talked for a while longer, not about the past, but about the future. He told me about his new job, about how he was finally painting for himself, not for money. I told him about my music, about the film score, about my life. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was a start. The next week, I received a text from Leo. "I heard you talk to Dad," it read. "He said you were doing great. I'm glad. I'm sorry, Anna, I was wrong." I didn't respond, but I didn't delete the message either. It was a small act of kindness, a sign that he was finally taking responsibility for his actions. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. That night, I didn't return my father's call. I didn't send a text. I didn't do anything. I just sat at my piano and composed. The music that came out of me was different from anything I had ever written. It was not angry or sad or filled with a sense of loss. It was calm and peaceful and filled with a deep sense of hope. It was a piece about letting go, about forgiveness, about finding your own voice. The music was my way of telling them that I heard them, that I acknowledged their pain, and that I was willing to start the long, slow process of healing. A few months later, I received an invitation to my niece's high school graduation. It was from my father, and the card was a simple, handwritten note. "We would be so proud if you came," it read. The card was signed, "Your family." I hesitated for a long time. I was scared. I was afraid that if I went, they would try to manipulate me, to pull me back into their world of toxicity and lies. But I also knew that if I didn't go, I would regret it for the rest of my life. I went. The graduation ceremony was beautiful, and my niece, who had always been a quiet observer of our family's drama, gave a beautiful speech about the importance of finding your own voice. As she spoke, I saw a flicker of recognition in my father's eyes, a silent acknowledgement that he had finally understood my struggle. After the ceremony, my father approached me, a look of nervous anticipation on his face. "Anna," he said, "I have something for you." He handed me a small box, and when I opened it, I saw a silver pin in the shape of a musical note. "I bought it for you," he said, "to show you how proud I am of you." I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw not a man who had used me, but a man who was trying to change. My relationship with my family is still a work in progress. There was no grand reconciliation, no sudden change in my mother's behavior, but there was a shift. My father and I began to talk more honestly, and Leo, as he began to build his own life, seemed to be building his own sense of independence. He started taking responsibility for his actions, something he had never done before. I had hoped that leaving would force them to change, but what I hadn't realized was that the biggest change would be in me. I was no longer the girl who believed her talent belonged to everyone else. I was a successful woman, building a life on my own terms. My relationship with David continued to grow, and he became an integral part of my new, healthy life. The story ends with the knowledge that the family myth of my music as a family inheritance had been shattered, not by a dramatic confrontation, but by the simple act of refusing to accept it anymore. In walking away, I had found my voice, my strength, and a way back to a version of family that, while imperfect, at least had the potential for health and truth. The road to healing was long and filled with difficult conversations and painful memories, but I knew that I was on the right path. I had finally found my own rhythm, my own melody, and I was finally free to compose a life of my own making. Have you ever experienced a similar situation or felt that same weight of family expectations? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, make sure to subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that sometimes the greatest harmony comes from a solo performance. Thank you for listening, and always remember that your worth is not a family inheritance, but a melody of your own making.